Good evening. Tonight we'll be reading from the book called An Elderly Lady is Up to No Good. And this is one of the best books I've ever read. It's about an elderly lady, but not your typical old lady, okay? And I am getting to be an old lady myself, so I found this book pretty funny. And it's also a mystery. You really don't know what she's going to do next or how she's going to get out of it. So I'll just begin now. Um, the shrill sound of the doorbell sliced through the silence. Maude sat motionless in her armchair, making no attempt to get up. Now remember, Maude is 88 years old, okay? And she lives alone in a apartment that she's lived in her entire life. She knew the bell would soon ring again and again and again. This had been going on for weeks. The reason behind the whole thing was her living arrangements, which were rather unusual. The apartment in which Maude lived was the only thing her family had managed to hold on to after her father's sudden death from a heart attack. Until then, he had kept up appearances, but when he died, the family lawyer quickly discovered there was virtually no money left. The only thing of value was a large apartment building in the Vassiston district of Gothenburg. When it was sold, the lawyer managed to work out an agreement with the new owner. To put it briefly, a clause was inserted in the contract stating that the widow and her two daughters should be allowed to remain in their apartment without paying any rent. They simply had to cover the cost of electricity, water, and heating. In return, the buyer was given the opportunity to purchase the building at a very reasonable price. In addition, the clause stated that for as long as any member of the family wishes to reside in the apartment, no rent will be payable. A few lines further down, it was made clear that the term member of the family referred only to the widow and her two daughters. 70 years had passed since the contract had been drawn up, and at the time no one could have envisioned that one of the daughters would still be living there. Of course, there had been a dispute over the interpretation of the original contract when the building was taken over by a housing authority many years later. But after taking the matter to court, Maude won the day and still lived rent free. The members of the Housing Association board ground their teeth in frustration, but there was nothing they could do. Though they did win a small victory when it was established that Maude had to pay a small monthly sum toward the general maintenance of the apartment building. It had now been about 40 years since Maude's sister died, leaving her with no living relatives. Maude lived alone and she went on vacation alone. That was the way she wanted it, freedom, no idle chatter and no problems. Idle chatter and problems were the worst things she could think of, and now she was faced with one of the big problems she had ever encountered, and she just couldn't see a way out. Maud realized she had only herself to blame. She had walked straight into the trap with her eyes wide open. Even though a little voice inside her head had tried to warn her, she could never have imagined how badly things would turn out. It had begun so innocently. During the spring, a genuine celebrity had moved into the building, a woman who was about 40 years old by the name of Jasmine Schimmerhoff. She was famous mainly because her parents were famous. As the only child of two of the Sweden's most well-known personalities, she experienced the trauma of growing up with parents who were totally preoccupied with their respective careers. Neither of them had much time to spare for their daughter, if any. A series of nannies and boarding schools were responsible for Jasmine's upbringing. Her father was a successful financier, and her mother had been one of the country's most internationally renowned opera singers. She toured the great opera houses of the world and was rarely at home with her husband and daughter. Jasmine's mother had died in a car accident just outside of New York a few years earlier. Nobody knew how it had happened because she had been alone when she crashed into a concrete column supporting an overpass. The newspaper showed pictures of the grieving widower, but there was no sign of Jasmine. After a period of intense undercover work by tabloid journalists, it emerged that she had been admitted to a private rehab clinic. She had been abusing both legal and illegal drugs, as well as drinking heavily. Her condition was so unstable that she wasn't even able to attend her mother's funeral. The trigger for the abuse was rumored to be her divorce from husband number two 6 months earlier. Both her first and second marriages had been childless. The press got plenty of headlines out of the tragedy, reveling in the misery of such a powerful family. Media interest flared up again when Ian Schmemmerhoff, Jasmine's father, got married again 6 months later to a woman 40 years his junior. Boy, how common is that these days? From the paparazzi shots taken at the couple's wedding in Switzerland, where they were now living, it was very clear that the new wife was heavily pregnant. A month or so later, Jasmine gained a half sibling 40 years younger than her. The headline writers had a field day, speculating on whether Maria Schimmerhoff's car crash really had been an accident or suicide. Over the next 2 years, no one had heard much about Jasmine Schimmerhoff. It was said that she was writing her autobiography, and when the book was published, it became an instant bestseller. Everyone wanted to know what life had really been like behind the stylish facade of the enormous villa in Orgetype. Let me know if I said that wrong. A number of reviews may have hinted that the use of language was poor, the descriptions of the characters somewhat flat, and the narrative style rather clumsy. But people didn't care. There was a few particularly juicy sections where Jasmine tore into her parents, especially her father. It was clear from the book that he had lavished money on his daughter, but he had given her neither his time nor his love. She wrote candidly about her father's affairs and how her mother had hit back with her own indiscretions. The book sold like hotcakes. The following year, Jasmine bought an apartment in Vassasistan in the same building where Maude lived. It was the only apartment on the ground floor. It had a special entrance at the foot of the elaborate marble staircase in the lobby, and its windows looked out onto both the street and the backyard. With the permission of the Housing Association Board, the previous owner had built a small glassed-in terrace at the back. He owned an IT company and had renovated the rundown apartment to the highest standards, according to what Maude had heard. When he married and the couple was expecting the first child, he sold the place to Jasmine Schimmerhoff and moved to a delightful house by the sea. Boy, that sounds nice, doesn't it? Right by the sea. Among other reasons, Jasmine wanted the apartment because it was fairly large, around 450 square feet. After the success of her autobiography, she had decided to embark on a new career. She was going to be an artist. Several walls were knocked down in order to make room for a substantial studio. Jasmine wanted to create large installations and needed space. She had spent the entire spring working on her creations. She wrote in her blog, "Me, Jasmine. I despite sovereignty and the patriarchy of grown up under that kind of oppression, and I know how terrible it is. I want to give the finger to all oppressors and tell them to go to hell. In October, I will be putting on an exhibition at the Hell Gallery. Come along and see my new pieces. At the moment, I am working on Phallus hanging. It's going to be a kick in the balls for all those bastard men. Maude had learned all this over the past few weeks by looking up newspaper articles online. She also found Jasmine's blog extremely informative, and it contained high-resolution pictures of various works. The enormous pieces of art had thickly painted layers of color, into which Jasmine had pressed photographs, scraps of fabric, sheet music, tampons. Maude couldn't quite see whether or not they were they were used. Oh my, I hope not. Fragments of bone and all kinds of unidentifiable trash. And trash was precisely the right word for Jasmine's art, in Maude's opinion. The pictures were titled No Title 1, No Title 2, and No Title 3, and so on. Her so-called sculptures all had the same construction. Each one had a concrete base into which Jasmine had struck various objects before the concrete had set. There were pieces featuring old exhaust systems pointing up at the ceiling, baseball bats, broken ice hockey sticks, golf clubs, cone-shaped items with missile or atomic bomb written on the side. Last but not least, enormous black rubber dildos. Needless to say, these masterpieces were titled Phallus 1, Phallus 2, and Phallus 3, presumably ad infinitum. Makes life easier, I suppose, Maude thought. Every morning, Maude spent an hour or so surfing the internet on her laptop, checking out interesting people and events. She hadn't bothered researching Jasmine's life when her flamboyant neighbor moved in. At the time, Maude had been fully occupied with planning her first visit to a spa. After very successful stays, she had gone on vacation to Sardinia, where she had spent 3 glorious months before returning to Gothenburg. And that was when it began. And here we go. Maude had been home for only a couple days when the doorbell suddenly rang. Those days it was a rare occurrence, so Maude went to see who was there. Through the peephole she could see a woman standing outside. Hesitantly, Maude opened the door and a fraction of an inch. The woman was slim and dainty, with bleached, tousled hair loosely pulled back in a ponytail on top of her head and a big pink plastic clip. She was smiling brightly and said in an exaggeratedly loud voice without pausing for breath, "Hi there, my name is Jasmine Shimmerhoff, and I moved in here back in the spring. I threw a big housewarming party for all the neighbors in August, but unfortunately you were away, so I thought I'd bring you a little taste of what we ate and a drink at the party. May I come in?" Broadly speaking, everyone Maude met these days spoke loudly and articulated with exaggerated clarity. They automatically assumed she was deaf, which she most definitely was not, nor was she senile, but she had learned that it was smart not to reveal that all her senses were in full working order. Instead, she allowed people to act in accordance with their own preconceptions. This was often a useful source of information, and Maude could form her own opinion of the person and the situation. But this time, she didn't exactly adopt her usual approach. Later on, Maude would blame it on the fact that she had been completely taken by surprise. Perhaps there was also a certain amount of curiosity about her famous neighbor. In any case, that was when she made her first mistake. She let her visitor into her apartment. I was a coffee break. Jasmine let her visitor into the apartment. Jasmine danced in through the door like a playful breeze. The careless ponytail bobbed and swung as she turned her head in all directions, checking out the spacious apartment. A sheer white caftan billowed around her, with only a tiny tank top underneath it. It was obvious she wasn't wearing a bra. Her black leggings were covered in pale dust and little hard lumps of something that looked like dried plaster or cement. Her feet were even dirtier, if that were possible. They were also rather conspicuous because Jasmine had shoved them into a pair of open sandals. Chipped blue nail polish adorned her toenails. She turned around, tilted her head to one side, and gazed appraisingly at the old lady who was still standing by the door. With another beaming smile, she handed over a shiny, bright red gift bag. There you go, leftover champagne and caviar. They both need to go in the refrigerator. We actually had shellfish too, but of course it didn't keep. Where's the kitchen? She said in a loud, cheerful voice. Her shining eyes should have warned Maude, but instead she made her second mistake. She accepted the red bag. Thank you, but there was really no need, Maude murmured. I know, but I thought you ought to feel that I'm living here now, that it makes a difference. We're going to be really good friends, Jasmine said in a light-hearted voice, but still at full volume. Before Maude could stop her, she shot off down the long hallway and found the kitchen door. So wonderful, and so much space. I'm sure nothing has changed since this place was built at least 100 years ago, apart from the stove and the refrigerator. Jasmine made the comment with a smile to show that she was joking, but Maude picked up something in her tone. She couldn't quite put her finger on what it was, but she knew right away that she didn't like it. This really is an enormous apartment. How big is it? Jasmine asked, still smiling. Almost 1,000 square feet, Maude answered reluctantly. It was actually slightly larger, but she thought that was none of Miss Schimmerhoff's business. Jasmine nodded to herself as if she had just received confirmation of something she already knew or suspected. She gave Maude a speculative glance that seemed to change her mind. I'd better go back downstairs and get on with my work. You're very welcome to come and have a look at my little studio. As I said, it's She didn't finish the sentence, but flashed another quick smile. Maude put the red gift bag on the counter and accompanied her uninvited guest to the front door. When they got there, Jasmine turned around and gave her a big hug. Maude could feel Jasmine's soft breasts under her top as they pressed against her own small, flat bosom. She was so taken aback that it didn't occur to her to defend herself. At the same time, she was embarrassed. Nobody had hugged her for several decades. In fact, she couldn't even remember the last time somebody had touched her, apart from the therapist at the Selma Spa Hotel, of course. But that had been entirely professional, rather an expression of affection. See you soon, Jasmine chirped. Maud had still not recovered from the hug and the confusing feelings it aroused. She caught herself mumbling something in response and nodding in agreement. To think that a hug could knock her off balance so completely. Without really knowing why, Maud once again had a bad feeling as she listened to Jasmine's footsteps disappearing down the stairs. And yet there was something else there, too, a longing for someone to touch her, for someone to smile at her. If only she had known. But how could she have known? Jasmine would turn out to be far removed from most things Maud had come across during her long life. Now that's part one of this story. There are two parts to this story. And if you want to come back in 15 minutes, we'll finish. Okay? Signing off. See you in 15 minutes.